If your own family starts treating you like a burden, maybe the problem isn't your age. Maybe it's their character. That was the thought that crossed my mind on the morning of my 70th birthday, though I didn't say it out loud. I still believed the day might turn out differently. I still believed that family meant something. I woke up before sunrise and stood in my kitchen making pancakes from scratch, just like I had every birthday Jason celebrated when he was growing up. The smell of vanilla and butter filled the house. Sunlight slowly crept across the hardwood floor. For a few quiet minutes, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. I had spent 2 weeks planning the gathering. Nothing extravagant, just dinner, cake, and the people I loved. I polished the silverware. I ironed the tablecloth. I even bought fresh flowers from a local market 20 miles away because Olivia once told me yellow roses reminded her of sunshine. Every place at the table had a name card. Jason, Vanessa, Olivia, and mine at the head of the table. By 4 o'clock, everything was ready. The roast sat warm in the oven. The cake rested on the counter beneath a glass cover. The candles waited beside it. I changed into a navy blue dress and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My hair was silver now. My face carried the marks of 70 years. But I stood straight. I looked respectable. I looked like a woman who had spent her entire life taking care of others. 5 o'clock came, then 6. No one arrived. I checked my phone. Nothing. I told myself traffic could be bad. Maybe they stopped somewhere first. Maybe Olivia needed help getting ready. At 6:30, I sent a message to Jason asking if everything was okay. No response. The roast cooled. The candles remained unlit. The silence inside the house grew heavier with every passing minute. At 7:15, headlights finally appeared outside my window. Relief washed over me. I straightened my dress and hurried to the front door. Jason walked in first. Vanessa followed behind him. Olivia stayed near the driveway, looking uncomfortable. "Happy birthday, Mom," Jason said. His voice sounded distracted, like he was thinking about somewhere else. "Thank you," I replied. I was worried something happened. Vanessa glanced around the dining room and laughed softly. Not a warm laugh. Not the kind that comes from happiness. "Wow," she said. "You really went all out." I smiled. "It's a special day." She folded her arms. 70 is definitely a milestone. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. We sat down at the table. The conversation never found a rhythm. Every question I asked seemed to drift into silence. Jason kept checking his phone. Vanessa kept looking around the room like she was evaluating a property she might buy. Then, halfway through dinner, she set down her fork and leaned back in her chair. "Jason and I have actually been discussing something," she said. I looked at my son. He avoided my eyes. "What is it?" I asked. Vanessa smiled. "We're worried about you." I laughed politely. "I'm doing fine." "Are you?" she asked. "Because maintaining a house this size at your age can't be easy." The room went still. Olivia stared at her plate. Jason said nothing. I felt heat rise into my face. "I've managed this house for over 30 years, I said quietly. "Exactly," Vanessa replied. "That's kind of the point." She took a sip of water before speaking again. "Honestly, Evelyn, if you can't take care of yourself forever, maybe it's time to think about assisted living before it becomes everyone else's problem." My fork froze halfway to my plate. Across the table, my son remained silent. And in that moment, on my 70th birthday, surrounded by the people I had spent a lifetime loving, I realized I wasn't sitting at a family celebration anymore. I was sitting in a room full of people who had already decided what my value was. I did not argue with Vanessa that night. I did not defend myself. I did not remind her that I had paid for the down payment on their first home or that I had spent years babysitting Olivia whenever they needed help. I simply nodded, cleared the plates after dinner, and watched them leave. Jason hugged me before walking out the door, but it felt rushed. Mechanical, like another task on a checklist. When the house finally became quiet again, I stood alone in the dining room. The flowers were still fresh. The candles had never been lit. Half the birthday cake remained untouched beneath its glass cover. I carried the dishes into the kitchen and washed them one by one. The water ran warm over my hands. The clock above the stove ticked steadily. No music, no laughter, no birthday wishes, just silence. I had become familiar with silence over the years, especially after my husband, Robert, passed away. The house had never felt quite the same afterward. Every room seemed larger. Every hallway seemed longer. Some mornings I still expected to hear his footsteps coming down the stairs. Sometimes I still reached across the bed before remembering he was gone. But grief was not the hardest part. Loneliness was. And loneliness had a way of showing you things you once ignored. As I stood in my kitchen that night, memories began lining up in my mind like pieces of a puzzle. Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. Vanessa had insisted they spend the holiday with her relatives instead. They promised to visit me afterward. They never came. Christmas the following year. I bought gifts for everyone and wrapped them carefully. At the last minute they canceled because of a ski trip. I spent the holiday watching old movies alone. Then there was Olivia's middle school graduation. I had arrived early and taken a seat near the front. Later I discovered my family had reserved seats together several rows away. No one had saved a place for me. At the time I told myself it was an accident, an oversight, something harmless. But standing there on my birthday, I was no longer sure. One memory led to another. A dozen small disappointments. 100 tiny exclusions. None of them large enough to cause a family argument. Yet together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The next morning I opened my refrigerator and looked at the birthday cake. I cut myself a small slice and sat alone at the kitchen table. The frosting tasted sweet. The silence tasted bitter. My phone remained still. No message from Jason. No apology from Vanessa. Nothing. Around noon I drove into town to pick up groceries. At the checkout line, I ran into an old friend named Linda. She smiled when she saw me. "How was the birthday celebration?" she asked. For a moment I hesitated. Then I smiled back and said it was quiet. Linda looked at me carefully. "Evelyn," she said softly, "you deserve better than quiet." Her words stayed with me long after I left the store. That evening I sat on my back porch watching the sunset spread across the sky. The air felt cool. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to ask a question I had been avoiding. What if the problem was not my age? What if the problem was that certain people had grown comfortable taking me for granted? I did not know the answer yet, but deep down, something had started to change. And 2 days later, a phone call would arrive that would change everything. 2 days later, I was folding laundry in the guest room when my phone rang. I almost ignored it. Most calls these days were telemarketers or automated reminders about appointments I had already written on my calendar. But something made me answer. "Mrs. Brooks?" a man asked. "This is Daniel Mercer from Mercer and Hayes Legal Services." I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "How can I help you?" There was a brief pause. Papers shuffled in the background. "I am calling regarding a parcel of land that was once owned by your late husband, Robert Brooks." My heart skipped. Robert had been gone for nearly 8 years. Most legal matters connected to his estate had been settled long ago. "There must be some mistake," I said. "I do not believe there is," Daniel replied. "Our records indicate that a 40-acre property in western Colorado remains under your ownership." I frowned. 40 acres? The numbers sounded unfamiliar. Robert and I had never discussed any land in Colorado. We had spent most of our lives in Ohio. Daniel explained that decades earlier, before we met, Robert had invested in several small parcels of undeveloped land. Most had been sold years ago. One had not. Apparently, a large development company was now seeking to acquire multiple neighboring properties for a major project. They had spent months tracking down the owners. My hands tightened around the phone. "And what exactly does that have to do with me?" I asked. "The company has submitted a purchase offer," Daniel said. "A significant one." I stared out the window at the backyard. The bird feeders swayed gently in the breeze. Everything looked ordinary, yet something inside me shifted. "How significant?" I finally asked. Daniel gave me a number. For several seconds I could not speak. I honestly thought I had heard him incorrectly. The amount was more money than I had ever imagined possessing. More money than Robert and I had earned during decades of careful work and saving. "Are you certain?" I whispered. "Very certain," he replied. "We have verified everything. Of course, you are under no obligation to sell, but I believe you should review the documents." After the call ended, I remained seated for a long time. The laundry basket sat forgotten beside me. Sunlight stretched across the carpet. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower hummed in the distance. My life had felt predictable for years. Fixed income, careful budgeting, watching every dollar. Suddenly, there was a possibility I had never expected. I pulled an old photo album from a closet shelf and opened it. There was Robert smiling beside an old pickup truck. Robert teaching Jason how to ride a bicycle. Robert standing in front of a mountain range during a road trip we took decades ago. I ran my fingers across the photograph. "What did you leave behind that you never told me about?" I asked softly. Later that afternoon, I met Daniel through a video conference. He shared maps, ownership records, legal documents, and appraisal reports. Everything was legitimate. Everything was real. Before ending the meeting, he offered one final piece of advice. "Until you make a decision, I would recommend keeping this confidential." I nodded immediately. That part felt easy. There was no one I wanted to tell. Not yet. Especially not Jason. Especially not Vanessa. For the first time in a very long while, something belonged entirely to me. And as I closed my laptop that evening, I had no idea that the quiet secret now resting in my hands would soon reveal the true character of everyone around me. For the next several days, I carried the secret quietly. Nothing about my routine changed on the surface. I watered the flowers. I bought groceries. I paid bills. I took my morning walks through the neighborhood just as I always had. But inside, my thoughts kept returning to Robert. The possibility that he had unknowingly left me something so valuable felt almost unreal. One afternoon, I drove to the cemetery and sat beside his headstone. The grass had been freshly cut. A few small flags from a recent holiday still fluttered near the entrance. I brought a folding chair and stayed longer than usual. "You always had surprises," I said softly. "But this one might be your biggest." A gentle breeze moved through the trees. I smiled despite myself. As I sat there, memories came back more clearly than they had in years. I remembered the tiny apartment where Robert and I started our life together. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The furnace barely worked in winter. We counted every dollar. Some weeks we lived on casseroles because they stretched further than anything else. When Jason was born, things became even harder. Robert worked long shifts. I worked part-time whenever I could. We took turns sleeping. We skipped vacations. We postponed repairs. Every sacrifice had one purpose: giving our son opportunities we never had. When Jason wanted to play baseball, we found the money. When he needed tutoring, we found the money. When college acceptance letters arrived, we found the money again. I still remembered the pride on his face when he graduated. Robert had tears in his eyes that day. He tried to hide them. He failed. Years later, when Jason met Vanessa, I welcomed her without hesitation. I wanted her to feel like family from the very beginning. I helped plan their wedding. I spent weekends addressing invitations and arranging decorations. When unexpected expenses appeared, Robert and I quietly covered them. We never asked for recognition. We never expected repayment. Family was supposed to help family. At least that was what we believed. Looking back, I could not identify a single moment when things changed. It happened gradually, like paint fading in sunlight. Vanessa became more distant. Jason became busier. Invitations arrived less often. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rare. Yet whenever they needed something, I was still the first person they contacted. I watched Olivia when school closed unexpectedly. I watered plants during vacations. I signed for deliveries. I showed up, again and again. Sitting beside Robert's grave, I finally understood something that had taken me years to see. Generosity without boundaries teaches people to expect rather than appreciate. I had spent so much time trying to be useful that I never noticed when gratitude disappeared. That realization stayed with me as I drove home. Later that evening, Daniel called with an update. The development company wanted to move forward quickly. Additional documents were being prepared. The offer remained strong, very strong. After ending the call, I stood at the kitchen window watching darkness settle over the backyard. For the first time in many years, I felt something unfamiliar. Not excitement, not revenge, freedom. The freedom of knowing I no longer needed anyone's approval. And while I stood there thinking about the future, several miles away, Jason and Vanessa were having a conversation that would soon place my name at the center of their attention once again. 3 weeks later, the paperwork was complete. I signed the final documents at Daniel's office on a quiet Tuesday morning. There were no fireworks, no dramatic announcements, no sudden feeling that life had transformed overnight. The pen moved across the paper. Daniel shook my hand. And just like that, a chapter that had begun decades earlier with a forgotten piece of land finally came to an end. When I walked outside, the world looked exactly the same. Cars passed. People hurried down the sidewalk, carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Yet something inside me felt lighter. For years I had worried about every unexpected expense. A broken appliance, a medical bill, a roof repair. Now those worries no longer controlled my thoughts. The money arrived several days later. Even seeing the numbers on a financial statement felt surreal. I checked twice, then a third time, not because I doubted it was real, because I had spent so much of my life making do with less. That abundance felt unfamiliar. I made one decision immediately. I was not going to change who I was. I was not interested in luxury cars or extravagant purchases. I did not need a mansion. I did not need designer clothes. What I wanted was peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing your future is secure. Over the next month, I quietly made practical changes. I met with financial advisors. I updated important documents. I established savings plans and charitable contributions. I repaired things around my house that I had postponed for years. The leaking gutter, the aging water heater, the cracked section of driveway near the garage. Small things, sensible things. One afternoon, I visited a charming neighborhood about 15 miles away. Tree-lined streets, well-kept homes, walking trails winding around a small lake. I found a modest house with large windows and a peaceful backyard. Nothing flashy, nothing that would attract attention. The moment I stepped inside, I felt calm. 2 months later, it became my new home. I moved quietly. No announcements, no social media posts, no family meeting. A few neighbors introduced themselves. They seemed kind. One woman invited me to join a local book club. Another recommended a farmer's market that opened every Saturday morning. For the first time in years, I began building a life that revolved around my own interests rather than everyone else's needs. Meanwhile, Jason rarely called. Vanessa called even less. Weeks sometimes passed without hearing from either of them. Surprisingly, that no longer hurt the way it once had. Distance has a strange effect. It allows you to see relationships more clearly. Without constant disappointment, I started noticing how peaceful my days had become. Then one Saturday afternoon, while unpacking a box of old photographs, my phone buzzed. A text message from Jason, the first one in nearly 3 weeks. It was brief, almost casual. He asked if I was home because he wanted to stop by sometime. I stared at the screen for a moment. Something about the timing felt unusual. Jason was not known for spontaneous visits, especially not lately. I replied politely and told him I had recently moved. Less than a minute later, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his response arrived. It contained only one sentence. "Mom, since when did you move into a place like that?" I looked at the message and felt a quiet chill settle over me. Somehow, somewhere, they had started noticing things. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. The following week answered every question I had been asking myself. Jason called twice, then 3 times. Then he left a voicemail asking if we could have lunch together. The sudden attention felt strange. For months, sometimes longer, I had been the one reaching out. Now the effort was coming from his side. I agreed to meet him at a small restaurant near my new neighborhood. When I arrived, he was already waiting at a corner table. He stood up quickly and smiled. The smile looked genuine, but there was something else behind it. Curiosity. We exchanged a brief hug and sat down. For the first few minutes, he talked about work, the weather, and Olivia's school activities. It felt almost normal. Then he asked the question he had clearly been waiting to ask. "So, Mom, how do you like the new place?" I smiled. "Very much. It is peaceful." "It looks expensive," he said casually. "Not really," I replied. "Just comfortable." He nodded but did not seem satisfied. Throughout lunch, he found different ways to return to the subject. The neighborhood, the house, the move, the timing. I answered politely without offering details. By the time we finished eating, I could see the frustration building behind his eyes. A few days later, I received another surprise. Vanessa called. Not a text, not a message through Jason. An actual phone call. The first one in months. "Evelyn," she said warmly, "I have been thinking about you." The sudden friendliness was so unexpected that I nearly laughed. Instead, I thanked her and listened. She asked about my health. She asked about my new community. She even suggested that we should spend more time together. After the call ended, I sat quietly on my porch and watched a squirrel run across the yard. People reveal themselves in patterns, not moments. Patterns. And the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Then came the real turning point. One afternoon, Daniel called. "I thought you should know something," he said. "Your property sale has become part of a public development record. Nothing improper, just accessible information. I closed my eyes. So anyone looking could find it? Anyone determined enough, he replied. Yes. Suddenly everything made sense. The lunch invitation, the unexpected calls, Vanessa's new warmth. They had discovered something. Maybe not every detail, but enough. 2 evenings later, confirmation arrived. A luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. I looked through the front window and immediately recognized it. Jason and Vanessa stepped out together. Neither had called ahead. Neither had asked if I was available. They simply appeared. I opened the door and invited them inside. Vanessa walked through the house slowly, admiring every room. "This place is beautiful," she said. "You never told us you were moving somewhere this nice." Jason looked around with equal interest. I offered coffee. They accepted. We sat around my dining table. For a few minutes the conversation remained pleasant. Then Vanessa leaned forward and smiled. "Evelyn," she said softly, "there is something we have been meaning to talk to you about." The tone of her voice told me everything before the words even arrived. Whatever came next was not about family. It was about something else entirely. And for the first time, I was prepared to listen without being fooled. Vanessa wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and gave me a smile I had not seen in years. It was the same smile she used at charity events and neighborhood gatherings. Polite, controlled, carefully practiced. "We have been worried about you," she said. I nearly admired how smoothly she said it. A few months earlier, she had suggested that I might be better off in assisted living. Now she sounded like the most concerned daughter-in-law in America. I nodded and waited. Silence can be surprisingly powerful. People often reveal more when you allow them room to keep talking. Vanessa glanced at Jason before continuing. "We realized we have not spent enough time together as a family." Jason quickly agreed. "She is right, Mom. We have all been busy. Too busy." I took a sip of coffee. "That happens." Vanessa leaned forward. "We want to change that." Over the next hour, they painted a picture of family togetherness that would have sounded convincing to a stranger. More dinners, more visits, more holidays together, more time with Olivia. Every sentence sounded generous. Every promise sounded heartfelt. Yet I could not stop remembering the birthdays they missed, the invitations that never came, the holidays spent alone. Actions leave deeper marks than words. Before leaving, Vanessa surprised me again. She hugged me tightly. "We love you, Evelyn," she said. The words hung in the air long after they drove away. The following week became one of the strangest periods of my life. Flowers arrived at my door, then a gift basket, then a handwritten card thanking me for being such an important part of the family. I stared at the card for several minutes before placing it in a drawer. 20 years earlier, it might have made me cry with happiness. Now it simply raised questions. Then came the phone calls. Jason called every other day. Sometimes every day. Vanessa sent cheerful messages asking about my health and offering to help with errands. Once she even volunteered to organize a family barbecue at my new house. The sudden attention felt overwhelming. Not because it was unpleasant, because it was unfamiliar. One Saturday morning, Olivia came to visit by herself. That was different, genuine. She walked through the front door, carrying a small container of homemade cookies. "I made these at school," she said proudly. We spent the afternoon talking, baking, and sitting on the back patio overlooking the lake. Unlike the adults, Olivia asked nothing about money, nothing about property, nothing about my move. She simply enjoyed being there. Before leaving, she hugged me and whispered, "I like it here." That simple sentence meant more than all the flowers and gift baskets combined. Later that evening, my phone rang again. Vanessa. Her voice sounded unusually excited. "I have an idea," she said. "Why do not we all have dinner together? Next weekend? A real family dinner." I agreed. After hanging up, I sat quietly by the window. Outside, the neighborhood lights reflected on the calm surface of the lake. Inside, my thoughts drifted back over the previous few weeks. The attention, the kindness, the compliments. Everything felt coordinated, almost rehearsed. Then another realization settled into place. Not once had either Jason or Vanessa directly asked about the source of my sudden financial security. Not once, which meant they were waiting for the right moment. Waiting until the stage was set. Waiting until they believed I trusted them again. And deep down, I had a feeling that the upcoming family dinner was not really about reconnecting at all. It was about making a request they had been carefully preparing to ask. The family dinner took place the following Saturday evening. I arrived a few minutes early at Jason and Vanessa's house, carrying a small dessert I had baked that morning. Old habits are difficult to break. Vanessa greeted me at the door with surprising enthusiasm. Jason offered to take my coat. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. Olivia ran over and hugged me immediately. That part felt real. That part always felt real. We gathered around the dining table and spent the first hour talking about ordinary things. School, work, neighborhood events, vacation plans. Vanessa laughed often. Jason seemed unusually attentive. More than once, I caught them exchanging quick glances across the table. The kind people share when they are waiting for the right moment to introduce a subject. I simply listened. Dinner ended. Plates were cleared. Coffee was served. Then the conversation shifted exactly where I expected it would. Jason leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together. "Mom," he began, "there is something we wanted to discuss with you." I smiled politely. "Of course." Vanessa immediately joined in. "We have been thinking a lot about the future." The future, such a harmless word. Such a useful word when people want something. Jason explained that they had been exploring investment opportunities, housing developments, commercial properties, long-term projects. He spoke carefully, almost as though he had rehearsed every sentence. Vanessa nodded at all the right moments. "There is a huge opportunity right now," she added. "The kind that could really help secure our family's future." I stirred my coffee and waited. Finally, the real request arrived. Jason cleared his throat. "We were wondering if you might consider becoming a partner." There it was. Not family, not reconciliation, not love. A proposal. Vanessa quickly jumped in. "Only if you are comfortable, of course. We just thought since you have recently done well financially, maybe this could benefit everyone." The room became very quiet. I noticed Olivia looking confused. She was young, but even she could sense something important was happening. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Vanessa did something unexpected. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know things have not always been perfect," she said softly. "I know I have made mistakes." Jason nodded. "We both have." She reached across the table. "We just want a chance to move forward together." Years earlier, those words might have worked. Years earlier, I would have focused on the apology rather than the timing. But life has a way of teaching difficult lessons, especially when disappointment repeats itself often enough. I looked around the table, at my son, at my daughter-in-law, at the carefully arranged evening, the flowers, the smiles, the sudden concern. Then I remembered my 70th birthday, the untouched candles, the cold roast, the silence. I remembered being treated like an obligation instead of family. I remembered every missed holiday and every forgotten invitation. I did not feel angry. That was the surprising part. I simply felt clear, very clear. I took a slow sip of coffee and placed the cup back on its saucer. "I appreciate your honesty," I said calmly. Relief immediately appeared on both their faces. They thought they knew what was coming next. They were wrong. Because earlier that week, after many conversations with advisors and several months of reflection, I had finalized a decision about my future. A decision neither of them knew existed. And sitting in my purse beside my chair was a folder containing documents that would change the entire conversation before the night was over. I reached into my purse and placed the folder on the table. The room immediately grew quiet. Jason looked curious. Vanessa looked hopeful. Neither of them understood what they were about to hear. I opened the folder slowly and removed several documents. "Before we talk about investments," I said, "there is something important I want you both to know." They exchanged a quick glance. Vanessa smiled politely. "Of course." I folded my hands on top of the papers. Over the past several months, I have spent a great deal of time thinking about the future. Not just my future, the future of the people and causes I care about. Jason nodded. "That makes sense." I looked directly at him. I also spent a great deal of time reflecting on the past. The smile on Vanessa's face faded slightly. I continued. "I thought about the years after your father died. I thought about birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, and the many moments when I felt invisible." Nobody interrupted. "I am not saying this to make anyone feel guilty," I said. "I am saying it because honesty matters." Jason lowered his eyes. Vanessa sat very still. For a long time, I convinced myself that being overlooked was normal, that being forgotten was accidental. But eventually patterns become impossible to ignore. The room remained silent. Even Olivia seemed to understand that something important was happening. I slid the documents across the table. "Several weeks ago, I finalized my estate plans. Jason blinked. Vanessa immediately looked down at the papers. Estate plans? She asked. Yes. I nodded. After careful consideration, I decided that most of my assets will be directed toward educational scholarships, community programs, and charitable organizations that help older adults live with dignity and independence. Neither of them spoke. I have also established a trust for Olivia's future education. Olivia looked surprised. Really? She asked. I smiled. Yes, sweetheart. Tears instantly appeared in her eyes. Then I looked back at Jason and Vanessa. The remainder of my estate will be distributed according to those documents. Vanessa stared at the folder. Jason looked stunned. For several seconds, nobody moved. Finally, Vanessa cleared her throat. So you already made all these decisions? I did, without discussing them with us. I considered the question carefully. Many important decisions were made without discussing them with me over the years. Her expression tightened. Jason leaned back in his chair and released a slow breath. The disappointment on his face was obvious. Yet I noticed something else as well. Understanding. Perhaps for the first time, he was seeing the situation through my eyes. Mom, he said quietly, is this because of us? I shook my head. No, this is because of me. He frowned. I do not understand. For most of my life, I built my decisions around what everyone else needed. This is the first major decision I have made entirely for myself. Nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. There was simply nothing left to debate. The truth had already arrived. After a while, I stood and gathered my things. Olivia hugged me tightly before I left. Outside, the night air felt cool and peaceful. As I walked toward my car, I realized something important. The greatest reward was never the money. It was clarity, the ability to see people exactly as they are. Some people noticed my worth only after my circumstances changed. Others valued me long before that happened. And once I understood the difference, every decision became remarkably simple. I drove home beneath a sky full of stars, feeling lighter than I had in years, knowing that my future finally belonged to me.